The spaceport cafeteria was bright inside, but cold outside where the wind hit the concrete walls. The girl sat alone on the rough stone bench outside the back wall, holding a cold tray of food in her lap. Her green skin was covered in dust. Her silver hair hung down in clumps, and her tired eyes looked at the floor with shame. Everyone inside was laughing, eating, and pretending she didn't exist. She was half-born. Her mother had been human, her father one of the lower caste Grellans. That mix made her dirty in their eyes. They called her a cross, a mix, a thing. She had no right to eat indoors, even though she worked in the same station. Even though she worked harder than most of them. Inside, the guards turned their eyes away when they saw her through the glass. They didn't care. Rules were rules. Mixed bloods were to be treated as animals. The cafeteria had its signs clearly marked. Full citizens only beyond this point. No one ever questioned it. No one ever tried. Then he saw her. The human in the brown uniform, the man with scars on his arms and dirt on his boots. He had just returned from patrol and was still carrying his gear. His tray was full. A hot meal with real food, not the bland protein blocks others ate. He noticed her sitting outside, her hands freezing, her food untouched. He looked around. Everyone else was busy. No one saw him walk outside. No one noticed him sit beside her. She tensed when he sat down. Her eyes widened and her hands shook. No one had ever come close to her during meal hours. No one had even spoken to her kindly in months. He placed his tray beside hers. Without a word, he cut a piece of his bread and handed it to her. Then he smiled, not in pity, but in warmth. She blinked, confused. Her hands hesitated before reaching out. She took the bread like it was made of gold. He nodded, and she finally took a bite. "You work in mechanics?" he asked gently. She nodded, unsure if this was a trick. He looked at her tools beside the bench. "Good set. I saw your work on the hauler dock last week. Clean wiring. You saved that crew from a nasty leak." Her eyes widened more. No one had ever praised her work before. "I'm Alex," he said. "And you?" She opened her mouth slowly. "Tari," she whispered. Her voice was dry and small. "They don't let me in." "I'm mixed." She looked down again. He didn't reply right away. Instead, he took a spoonful from his own plate and placed it onto her tray. Hot stew now steamed between them. The smell hit her first. She hadn't tasted real stew in years. Not since her mother died. Her fingers shook as she lifted the spoon. He didn't say anything. He just kept adding small portions from his tray to hers until they were eating together. Two strangers on a cold bench, sharing one meal in silence. Inside the cafeteria, eyes started to turn. A few soldiers near the window noticed. A whisper spread. Some frowned, others laughed. But one officer stood up sharply. He stormed toward the door. Rules were being broken. An outsider was eating with a soldier. A half-breed dared to sit beside a human. The officer reached the door just as a senior mechanic walked in. He saw Alex and Tari eating together and paused. The man tilted his head and watched, then turned toward the angry officer. "She's done more for this station than half your men," the mechanic said. "Let them eat," he added with quiet authority. The officer gritted his teeth, but said nothing. Rules were rules, but power spoke louder. And the mechanic's word meant credits. The officer turned back inside, fuming. At the bench, Tari looked up. "They'll punish you," she whispered. Alex shrugged. "Then I'll eat outside with you from now on," he said calmly. Tari's heart felt something strange. Not fear, not sadness, something warm and sharp. She looked at him as if seeing something new. Not a soldier. Not just a human. But someone who had done what no one else dared. Someone who had shared more than food. He had given her dignity back. For the first time since she arrived at the station. She smiled. The news spread fast across the station. By the next day, whispers had turned into tension. Some humans called Alex foolish. Others called him brave. But among the workers, especially the younger ones, there was a shift in how they looked at Tari the next morning. Alex walked toward the cafeteria and saw something he didn't expect. Tari was already sitting at the bench outside, holding a tray in her lap. But this time, she wasn't alone. 2 small Grellan children sat beside her, their feet dangling over the edge. She was sharing what little food she had with them. Alex smiled and sat down beside them again. He had brought extra. As he placed a fresh plate in front of each child, Tari looked at him in silence, her eyes full of something too deep for words. She had always eaten alone. Now the bench felt like a table. "You're feeding them too now?" he asked gently. Tari nodded. "Their mother works night shift. She doesn't get food until late. They'd go hungry all day if I didn't," she said softly. One of the children looked up and offered him a small bite in return. Alex took it without hesitation. More. Soldiers passed by that day. Some stopped. Some frowned. A few smiled. No one spoke, but everyone saw. The bench outside was no longer just for shame. It had become something new. A place of quiet resistance. A place of care. By the 3rd day, things started to change. 1. Human technician, a quiet woman named Riva, walked outside with her lunch and sat next to them. She didn't speak. She just ate her food while listening to the children's stories. The next day, 2 more joined. Tari barely knew what was happening. For so long she had been ignored, mocked, or avoided. Now she heard laughter near her. Now she heard her name spoken with kindness. It felt like sunlight on frozen stone. Slow, but unstoppable. Inside the command center, however, things were not warm. Officer Calrin, who had first tried to stop Alex, now felt insulted. He saw his rules being broken, his power being tested. To him, the separation of bloodlines was law. And laws weren't made to be questioned. He called Alex in for questioning. The room was gray and sharp. Calrin stood behind the desk with his hands folded. "You're a soldier, not a hero," he said coldly. "You've embarrassed the station and ignored the code. Do you deny it?" Alex looked him in the eye and said, "I shared a meal." "That's not treason." Karen's face tightened. "You will follow orders. If you sit with her again, you'll be demoted. Do you understand?" Alex stayed silent for a moment. Then he leaned forward and said, "If that's the price for being decent, then take my badge now." The silence in the room was heavy. That same evening, Alex returned to the bench. Tari was waiting, her tray full of dull rations. But the moment she saw him, her shoulders relaxed. He sat beside her without a word. The 2 children giggled and hugged his leg. He handed out warm food like it was normal. A storm was coming. Tari could feel it. She had lived under rules too long to believe kindness went unnoticed. She looked at Alex with worry. "They'll take you away," she said quietly. "They'll punish you for this." He looked at her and answered, "Then let them." "I won't." "Stop." That night, in the sleeping quarters, more workers whispered his name. Some said he was foolish. Others said he was strong. One mechanic, an old Grellan, tapped the wall and said, "He's not just feeding them, he's making them feel like people again." And that meant more than food. Across the metal walls of the station, something had begun. It wasn't loud. It wasn't fast, but it was real. Tari could feel it in the way eyes met hers. Not all with kindness, but many now with hesitation. As if unsure whether to hate her or to understand her, Alex saw it too. And he smiled, not because they had won anything, not yet, but because the silence that once protected cruelty had finally been broken. The bench outside the cafeteria was full again that night. Tari was used to staying invisible. Most of her life had been lived in corners, behind closed doors, or outside places where others sat in comfort. But now, people noticed her. Some stared with confusion, others with disgust, but a few looked with something else. Curiosity. When the cafeteria door opened each day, it wasn't just her stepping out anymore. Alex joined her without fail, and more humans began bringing their trays outside. Slowly, carefully, the bench became crowded. It was still cold metal, but it felt like something sacred was happening. One evening, as the artificial lights dimmed, for simulated night, Alex noticed bruises on Tari's arms. "Who did that?" he asked. She looked away and said, "Just someone reminding me I'm not welcome." Alex clenched his fists. He had seen violence before, but not like this. Not in silence. He stood up and spoke to the others sitting around. "If anyone here lays a hand on her again, they'll deal with me," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was heavy. No one argued. A few nodded. One soldier even stood and said, "We've had enough shame for one lifetime." That night, someone left a warm blanket on Tari's bunk. Another person patched her torn sleeve. No one claimed credit. That was the beginning of quiet rebellion. Not loud. Not angry. Just acts of quiet decency where none had existed before. But Karen had eyes everywhere. The station's order depended on fear, not unity. When he saw the cameras replay Alex's speech, he summoned Central Command. "The infection is spreading," he said bitterly. "Discipline must return before we lose control." They called a meeting. Only the highest-ranked humans were invited. Alex was not. The others argued. Some said the bench should be removed. Others suggested moving the Grelin to another sector entirely. One older officer, Commander Stokes, said nothing for a while. Then he stood and asked one question. "Is kindness the threat now?" The room fell silent. No one answered. But Karen's jaw tightened. Orders were passed quietly. Punishments were written. They didn't want martyrs. They wanted silence returned. The next day, the bench was gone. Where it once stood was a warning sign. Unauthorized gathering prohibited. Tari stood in front of it, frozen. She didn't cry. She just stood there holding her tray. The children clung to her sides, confused. Alex walked up and placed his tray on the floor. He sat on the ground and began eating. One by one, others followed. A few workers, a mechanic, even a medical officer. No one spoke, but the message was clear. If they couldn't sit on a bench, they'd sit on concrete. Calvin arrived minutes later. His boots echoed through the corridor. He looked at the crowd sitting on the floor and growled, "You've all been warned. You will face disciplinary action." No one moved. Alex looked up and replied, "Then start writing names." Calvin did. Dozens of them. He thought fear would break them. Instead, the next day, double the number came. Then more. A ripple had become a wave. He ordered soldiers to break up the group. But they refused. Some even joined the floor themselves. The station was no longer silent. It buzzed with energy. Something was growing, not from anger, but from refusal to be ashamed. Tari still sat in the same spot. Her eyes scanned the crowd each day. When she saw faces she once feared, now sitting beside her, something inside her began to heal. One night, after lights out, Alex found a drawing stuck to his locker. It showed a human and a green-skinned girl sharing a meal. Under it, a child had written, "Our real leader." He didn't know who drew it, but he smiled. He folded it and kept it in his chest pocket. Even those who didn't sit outside now carried guilt in their silence. They looked away less often. A nod here, a pause there. People had started to see her as more than her skin, her bloodline, or her past. They started seeing her as one of them. Tari felt lighter, not safe, not equal, but something had changed. And it had started with a tray of food. A single act of kindness that refused to bend under pressure. Now, others were carrying it forward. The floor where she once ate in shame had become a gathering ground. Asterisk, The order came quietly, sent through encrypted channels. Karen had lost patience. The growing support for Tari was not just a problem. It was a threat. Unity between humans and the Grellan species would weaken the control the station maintained through fear and separation. Alex was summoned to the operations deck. Not as a soldier, but as a subject of discipline. He entered the room and stood before a line of officers, most of them human. A few wore their discomfort openly. Others hid behind cold faces. Karen didn't look at him. He simply read out the charges: defying command authority, inciting disorder, undermining species protocol. Alex said nothing. He waited until Karen asked, "Do you deny any of it?" Alex answered, "I shared my meal with a child." If that's rebellion, then yes, I rebelled. They dismissed him. No verdict, no punishment. But by the next morning, his assignment had been changed. He was sent to waste processing on the lower levels. A clear message: obey or vanish into silence. Tari noticed his absence. The bench had not returned, but the people remained. Some asked questions. Others waited. When word spread of Alex's reassignment, silence fell across the group. Then, slowly, one by one, the others began requesting transfers too. Not to rebel, but to stand beside him. Karen was furious. He called for tighter control. No gatherings. No sharing of food between species. No speaking in non-work sectors. A list of rules was posted across the station. But people had changed. They didn't tear the posters down. They simply ignored them. Tari walked through the halls and felt eyes on her. But fewer were filled with hate. Some nodded. A few smiled. Children waved. She returned to her quarters that night and found a sealed package. Inside was a fresh tray of food and a note that read, "For your strength." Still, not everyone was with her. A small group of humans, loyal to Karen's views, formed their own guard. They patrolled the halls, mocked anyone who spoke to Tari, and threatened those who sat with her. One evening, a young human girl was shoved for handing Tari a flower. Tari rushed to help. She knelt beside the girl and whispered, "Don't let them teach you fear." Karen used the incident to justify force. He ordered the station's peacekeepers to detain anyone gathering near Tari, but many of them refused. "We're not here to punish kindness," one officer said. Karen replaced them with drones. Cold, unfeeling, and always watching. Alex worked. In silence, the lower deck smelled of rot and rust. But even there, his name had power. One worker handed him a cloth and said, "You gave up your meal for them. We remember." Another shared his shift, just to lighten the load. Humanity, hidden in shadows, was waking up. Meanwhile, Tari began to speak more. Not loudly, not to command, but to teach. She told stories of her people, songs her mother used to hum, games her siblings played before the separation laws came. The children listened, so did the adults. The stories weren't powerful because they were dramatic. They were powerful because they were real. One night, the drones arrived at her door. They scanned her room and took her without a word. She didn't resist. She looked into the eyes of one child hiding in the hallway and said, "Remember what kindness feels like." They placed her in a cold cell. Lights always on, food always. Cold, no voices, no answers, just silence. But she was not forgotten. The news spread fast. People whispered in the corridors. Someone scratched her name onto the cafeteria wall. A group of engineers faked a power failure in her sector to delay her transfer. Medics hid messages in supply crates. Even janitors passed signals through cleaning routes. A whole network had formed, bound not by orders, but by one shared memory, a girl who once ate alone on a bench. Karen increased surveillance. He locked down sectors, denied visitors, issued warnings. But the more he tried to suppress, the more visible she became. Her absence became presence. Her silence became message. Her kindness became resistance. In one empty hallway, someone had drawn her image. Below it were simple words, "We sit with her." The protest didn't start with noise. It began with a tray. A single tray of food left untouched in the main cafeteria. Then another, and another. Humans and aliens alike refused to eat. They sat quietly, shoulder to shoulder, in silence. Some brought signs that said nothing. They simply had her name on them. Cowan watched the security feeds with a clenched jaw. Disobedience, he called it. Contamination of morale. He issued a threat. Anyone who continued to sit with the protesters would lose all station privileges. But no one moved. They stayed seated, trays untouched, eyes calm. Tari remained. Locked away, but she could hear things, distant steps. Faint voices from guards who passed too close to her cell. They're all sitting, for her. She smiled quietly and pressed her hand to the cold wall. She did not feel alone anymore. Alex, still in waist duty, received a message smuggled in a toolbox. A short sentence on scrap paper. She's been moved to cell sector 9. He folded it and tucked it close to his heart. He didn't need orders. He already had a mission. He made contact with 3 others in the lower levels. Mechanics, engineers. One was a medic. They planned a timed failure in the drone patrols. Just enough to make an opening. Not to escape the station. Just to get to her. The hallway lights dimmed at the exact second they had planned. 2 doors unlocked. A camera lost signal. Alex and the others moved quickly. Every step was risk. Every second counted. But none of them hesitated. They knew who she was, what she meant. They reached the cell, but the door was stronger than expected. No keypad, no override. Just solid metal. Alex stepped forward and spoke into the small slit. "Tari, it's me." On the other side, a voice answered, soft but steady. "I knew you would come." The alarm sounded. Security had noticed. The rescue team didn't panic. They blocked the hallway using sealed maintenance hatches. One stayed behind to delay pursuit. He looked at Alex and said, "Make it matter." Then closed the door behind them. Tari emerged from the cell, blinking. Against the light, her face was thinner. Her hands shook, but her eyes were clear. She reached out and Alex took her hand. "Let's go," he said. And they moved together through the tunnels of the station. The protest had grown. Now nearly half the station had joined. No one shouted. No one fought. They simply refused to obey. The central cafeteria was full. Humans, Grullans, and even a few other species sat together in quiet resistance. Calran sent drones. He ordered arrests. But the drones didn't fire. They hovered, uncertain. The humans stood between them and the protesters. One child walked up and handed a drone a flower. The drone scanned it, then flew away. Tari walked into the cafeteria. The room fell silent. Then someone stood and clapped. Another joined. Then, more. A slow wave of sound and strength. Not just for her, but for what she represented. The right to exist. The right to eat beside others. Calran stormed into the room. Face red, voice loud. "This ends now," he shouted. But no one answered. No one obeyed. They simply turned their backs to him and faced Tari. She stepped forward and said calmly, "You can't scare people who've already chosen truth." The council arrived 2 days later. Not by invitation, but because the broadcast had reached them. They saw the footage, the peaceful protest, the refusal to obey injustice, the humans standing beside those called unclean. It was a message too loud to ignore. Calran was removed from command. Without ceremony, without a farewell. He was not hated, just forgotten. His rules torn from walls, his orders deleted. His name faded into the background. Tari stood on the main platform of the station with Alex beside her. She looked out over the crowd and said, "I ate alone for years, but today, no one eats alone." The crowd cheered. But more than that, they shared food, laughter, and stories. And when the next ship arrived at the station, the first thing visitors saw was a statue. Not of a soldier, not of a commander, but of a girl sitting on a bench holding out a tray of food. The plaque below said only this: "Kindness is stronger than silence."